believing that God brings things along every day to make me aware of what He's doing and trying to show me stuff along the way. But I had two people that I interviewed, one for choir, one as an instrumentalist today. And it just struck me, the one who was here as an instrumentalist had gone to the Berklee School of Music and back in the East Coast, and I've been praying for another guitarist since we're losing one. So when I got this email saying, I'd like to play for your church, well, maybe this is the answer to prayer. So he came in and we interviewed today. Not quite to the degree that we need here at Grace as a guitarist, but more importantly, he still has to find the Lord.
Oh, wow.
And so, it always gives you an opportunity to share the gospel with somebody, which is good. I don't get to do that a lot in church. But at the same time, it struck me that there didn't seem to be any real sense in him that there was a problem playing in a church, and yet at the same time not necessarily embracing what the church believes. Then I interviewed somebody for choir, a whole different situation in the sense that they recognized that they had been living a very false life before God, and the weight of that tension that she really brought on herself and trying to pretend that she should go to church and be this person, and at the same time living in the world and making all the mistakes that oftentimes we all make. But about 3 years ago, she just decided, I've had it with trying to pretend, and more importantly, God's had it with me. And so to see both those things, somebody who wanted to serve the Lord out of that sense of brokenness, out of that sense of really understanding it's time for me to really get real about life and get real about ministry and real about my spiritual, really my spiritual identity, and somebody who was pretty focused on music, a young kid, and he's, I told him I'd love to get together with him and have coffee and talk more about it. But it brought to mind again one of my favorite verses in Psalm 51. That's David, who's obviously been found out with Bathsheba, and writes this song about his confession and his spiritual state. He says in verse 16 and 17, "You will not delight in sacrifice, or I would give it. You will not be pleased with a burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, you will not despise." It's interesting to me because I saw both of those today. I saw somebody who was really all about maybe just offering some kind of musical offering to God without a sense of brokenness, and somebody who was broken and hoping that they could be a part of whatever this family is that would not only continue to feed her spiritual life, but give her a chance to kind of hone that focus that she needs for her life. And again, when you read this in Psalm 51, a broken and contrite heart, it's not the broken heart of unrequited love. It's obviously rather a broken will, if you will. And that's really what God is looking for. Brokenness isn't a feeling or an emotion. It's really an act of will. It's an ongoing thing. It's a lifestyle that we live, this idea of brokenness. And truly, we really just have to come to agree with God that we are what He sees us to be. Not what other people see us to be, not what we hope other people see us to be, but we truly are what God sees us to be. And when we are, then we're more willing to just surrender and recognize that we have nothing on our own that we can truly bring to him. But God doesn't delight in our actions as much as our motivations, and he doesn't delight in our sacrifices as much as he does in obedience. So it was just an interesting day to see both those things side by side, one right after the other. And it's interesting because the one who I feel really is broken recognizes that there are consequences to some of the decisions that they had made that continually kind of wear her down. And yet at the same time, I almost feel like some of that is something we have to embrace as some of the ways that God really does crush us. That's really what and it's not our personhood as much as our self-will, as much as that sense of, okay, yeah, that's a result of some decision I made. That's not doing this, or omission or commission, whatever the case may be. And it's a good thing when God decides to break you, because he's breaking the right things in you. And she recognized that. It's the very reason why when you talk about breaking a stallion, if you will, breaking a horse, we're not talking about breaking their legs. We're actually talking about breaking their will, right? And so that's the very kind of brokenness that God is after. So that just as a horse would be subservient to the rider, our will would be subservient to God and to the Spirit of God, so that really the very presence of Christ can take over, can move in us, and really do the very things that we're created to do. I often think too, in times when I think of brokenness, we're all sitting in this drought these days, and I don't know about your garden, but if I look at the lawn, especially where my dogs killed most of it, it's very dry and it's very cracked. Yeah. And sometimes you really just have to get in there with a hoe and break it up and soften it up. Sometimes the very idea, the very act of God breaking our will is really just softening the ground. It's breaking up those real hard, rocky places in our will that then makes it much easier for him to plant the seed of his word and let it grow deep so that the roots can actually get down where he wants it to be. So brokenness can be a softening kind of thing, as well as it can be something that oftentimes takes us, as it did to David, to a point of saying, it's not really what I do for you, Lord. It's really what I surrender to you. It's really what my heart's going to be every time we do that. And I think too, and this is what challenges me the most, and as I started looking at these thoughts, I really drew back, because I knew I wasn't being original about any of this. Because a woman by the name of Nancy DeMoss wrote a book called Brokenness, which I think, if you've never read it, it's very short. This is where most of this idea comes from, so I'll give her credit. But additionally, it's not just the brokenness of my heart before God. It really, the truest measure of that brokenness sometimes comes with how I relate to other people, not as much just how I relate to God. The word is very clear. God says, if you say you love me, but you don't love your brother, then you're a liar. I love it when God just kind of does that in your face. Because how can you, not love your brother who you can see and love me who you can't see? So the whole issue, and I've known people all my life that talked about, I really don't want to be a part of the church, all this kind of stuff. And a lot of times that really just means I don't want to do the hard work of proving my love for God by loving these people. And oftentimes what that really says is that I don't know how to love these people. And so if you're like me, it's a challenge. And when God put me in ministry, and now I had to love people in a way that I had never been challenged before, and yet I recognized this is really what God wanted me to do all along. It really did bring me to a place of saying, Lord, I thought I loved you the way you want to be loved. I thought I was surrendered to your will. But when you brought some of these really hard-nosed people, some of these critical people, some of these people who I would look at as going, boy, they made stupid mistakes. And I failed to see that, but by the grace of God, I would have made those same mistakes over and over and over again. You know, we all do that kind of stuff. But my heart was really exposed to some of the judgmentalism that's there, sometimes the legalism that's there, sometimes the whole idea of, and probably more importantly, my lack of prayer for other people. If I really want to know how much I love people, I have to look at how much I pray for them. And when I realize I really don't do that as much, although I'm trying to more and more and more as time goes on, those are ways that God continues to break me and remind me that, hey, it's not just what you feel about me. It's not just saying you love me. It really is, how much do you love these people around you? And how much does that show in the very nature of your love for them? Because we can't really say I'm broken before the Lord until we're really broken before His people. Because I think those two go hand in hand, which is why I love this group, because I feel like sometimes I can be honest with you, even about my own struggles. I hope it doesn't damage your sense of the church when you know that some of the pastors aren't perfect people. But I know, surprise, surprise. But you know, we're all in this together, and my effectiveness here at this church has not been born out of my progress. It's really been born out of the prayers of people who lift me up and continually bring me before God and say, please help that man. And I recognize that. I recognize that completely, because I'm just like everybody else, you know, struggling to love everybody, struggling to pray for everybody, struggling to believe that somehow we all connect on a level that most of us don't ever see and recognize. But that's the very level that God wants us to, and the very sacrifice that I believe David talks about. He really wants a brokenness in us, and that surrender our will, not just to Him, but to what He's doing in other people as well. So I just share that with you because it was an interesting day for me to enjoy meeting a couple of different people, but find that they had a whole different kind